please. Thank you for your service too. Thank you.
Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam.
That's okay.
You don't want to ruin that jacket.
Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam. Hadayan Ha'emet. Blessed are you, Lord our God, Lord, ruler of the universe. You are the true judge. And we rip it.
Ourselves? Yes, please. Thank you.
By ripping the ribbon, it represents how their lives are torn by the loss of their dad. And the ribbon is placed above their heart on the left side for their dad. At the rising of the sun and at its going down, we remember him. At the blowing of the wind and in the chill of winter, we remember him. And at the opening of the buds and in the rebirth of spring, we remember him. And at the blueness of skies and in the warmth of summer, we remember him. And at the beginning of the year when it ends, we remember him. When we are weary and in need of strength, we remember him. When we are lost and sick at heart, we remember him. And when we have joy we crave to share, we remember him. When we have decisions that are difficult to make, we remember him. And when we have achievements that are blessed on his, we remember him. As long as we live, he will live, for he is now a part of us as we remember him. It's traditional that a prayer called the El Male Rachamim is read. I just want to share with you that the prayer is really about asking God to grant Arthur Hoffer to grant him rest under the wings of his presence. Donna, here's some tissues that you might need. I'm good. And before we do after we do the dirt, we do the mourner's Kaddish. And you have to, okay. Okay. Arthur Hoffer, Hebrew name Avram Yitzhak, so fitting as Avram means father of many, and I see his children and grandchildren here today. Yitzhak means laughter. Arthur always laughed. Was born December 13th, 1932 in Brooklyn. Son of Sylvia and Sam, brother to Julie and Shelley. I understand younger sister Shelley, along with her husband Freddie, are Zooming with us today from Florida. As Arthur's younger sister, Shelley, I offer you my condolences on the loss of your brother, as your brother was your CLR, your closest living relative. Our siblings know us longer than our children and our spouses. Shelley, may you find strength in your memories. author's older sister, Julie, and her husband, Eli, are both deceased. Okay. Also Zooming with us today are Ellie's sister and brother-in-law, Eileen and Mark, and all of Arthur's nieces and nephews. Arthur married the love of his life, Eleanor, Ellie, on December 24th, 1956, Christmas Eve. They shared a marriage of 60 years and produced 3 daughters, Donna, Lisa, and Jill. Donna explained to me how Ellie was the love of his life. He loved her unconditionally. Having married Ellie, Arthur also married her family. But together, Arthur and Ellie raised their 3 daughters with love and deep family values. They saw their girls married to Lloyd, David, and Dan, who in turn produced Brian, Katie, Olivia, and Emma, their pride and joy. Today is October 11th. In the Hebrew calendar, it's the 23rd of Tishrei, 5781. We celebrate the holiday today of Simchat Torah. But what does that mean? How does it relate to Artie? Well, Simchat means celebration. And today we celebrate Artie. As explained to me, Artie wanted us to rejoice and share laughter at his funeral. And in a few moments, I know his family will share with us some of those funny anecdotes and memories. And Torah, wherever Artie lived his life, in whichever community he served, he found himself where he served. He was a mensch, right? Always doing the right thing. And when the Torah states choose life, there was Artie, his education, his engineering expertise, his questioning mind created, invented, and patented so many products that make our lives better today. And lastly, as an Army soldier, what we just saw earlier, proud to serve in Korea, he exemplified patriotism, love of country, part of the greatest generation. Earlier, as you saw, he was given the military tribute and the American flag, which draped his coffin, folded and presented to his oldest daughter according to military rules. A few times I was with Artie. 2 things stand out. While sitting Shiva for Ellie, as all the young people were sitting around talking, he pulled Donna and her sister aside and expressed a very strong desire to have a solemn moment for Ellie. I led that Shiva minyan, and we surrounded a table indicative of your family, Donna, laden with Danish cake, cookies, chocolates, and even more sweets, indicative of a party. We all prayed and were there for Artie. And I remember him shedding tears. When I visited Art at his home in Gracewood, I perused some of the myriad number of scrapbooks that defined Artie's work with such precision and detail that they were made. They're far from scrap. And I'll tell you, children and grandchildren, let's call them Arthur's legacy, his record-keeping histories by which Arthur will be remembered. His inventions, his patents, newspaper, magazine clippings, and articles, lastly, all the awards. Proof of his brilliance and humanity, always ahead of his time. To you, his children and grandchildren, you must cherish and hold on to these documents because Arthur will live on through you, his issue, children and grandchildren, and he will be remembered for all the good and joy he did to make his world and ours a better place. And speaking of remembrance, Arthur's last wish was to always be remembered Donna and Lloyd, Lisa and Jill and Dan, Brian, Katie, Olivia and Emma. Remember for yourselves how you were there for him in his last days, every day, near him, holding hands, speaking softly, and walking in and out of his room. Remember the love. Remember. And now I'm going to invite children and grandchildren to speak, but I understand Lloyd is to speak first, please, and then you'll let me know in which order you would like everybody to speak. Please, Lloyd.
Hi, everybody. It's a little story about Arthur Hoffer, a life well lived. I first met Artie Hoffer in 1980, before I really knew Donna. I claim to have met her once in 1977 in South Florida. She claims I never met her. I was a junior at the University of Michigan when one random morning, suddenly my non-digital landline rang. Hi, Lloyd, Artie Hoffer here. Perry White's gave me your number. My daughter Lisa is looking at Michigan. Perry said you would be happy to show us around. We met in the library, and although Lisa was looking at the school, Artie did 99% of the talking. Lisa ended up going to Cornell, and ironically, I became Artie and Ellie's son-in-law 3.5 years later. Apparently, first impressions do matter. Arthur Hoffer was born in Brooklyn in 1932, the second child and the first son of Sylvia and Sam Hoffer, immigrants from Poland and Austria. He had two sisters, Shelley the youngest, Julie the oldest. His father, Sam Hoffer, worked in groceries, ultimately opening his own business in partnership with his brothers Morris and Henry. They opened Hoffer Brothers Wholesale Grocers and eventually built a small supermarket adjacent to their warehouse. Their canned goods carried the label Hofbro. Artie began to develop his trademark style, working odd jobs in the neighborhood, including delivering prescriptions for a local pharmacy where he was able to source free condoms for his friends. At Hoffer Brothers, he was entrusted with the privileged task of thinly slicing Lox and Nova by hand. Some years ago, he gifted me the knife that he used to slice so elegantly. Artie graduated high school, and with what he said were bad grades and a bad attitude. He was planning to enroll at Brooklyn College. More significantly, he was a member of an exclusive club of crafty, streetwise youths, the Bantams, who were known for furnishing their clubhouse by looting the lobbies of apartment buildings on Ocean Parkway. He and his co-conspirator, Saul Ginsberg, also had a thriving business in renting XXX rated French films, which they acquired from a guy in Philly and rented out to local fraternities and sororities. His future seemed cloudy at best, without much direction or any specific plans or purpose. Being drafted, and more importantly, being unable to finagle his way out of joining the Army, would prove to be a turning point in his life. Artie used his time in the military to hone his entrepreneurial skills and, as he put it, grow up. Unlike many of his peers, he actually enjoyed his time in the military. Upon completion of his service, he became eligible to go to school for free on the GI Bill. He would now add well-earned academic credentials to his smart and crafty mind. He was bright, well-educated, streetwise, and poised for greatness. His subsequent successes in life will utilize this winning combination. Upon returning from Korea, he was determined to find a more rewarding career outside the grocery business. Within a short time, he was climbing the academic ranks and had met the woman he would eventually marry, Eleanor Maydeck. Artie transferred from Brooklyn College to CCNY, enrolled in the engineering program, while Eleanor graduated and started teaching. He continued to work at Hoffer Brothers during school to keep his young family above water. After several years of higher education, Artie had earned a Bachelor a bachelor's of electrical engineering and an MBA from City College of New York, and a master's in electrical engineering at NYU. Filled with confidence and an array of impressive academic credentials, Artie was in high demand. He parlayed this into a succession of great jobs at great companies. He was a research engineer at IT&T, followed by a program engineer on the Polaris missile program for Litton Industries, and he had then risen to vice president of American operations for military and commercial electronic equipment for CSF Thompson, a French company. After an impressive start to his career, he and his partner, Jim Hall, decided to strike out on their own. In 1966, they launched Transvac Incorporated, which grew into a multinational engineering and manufacturing company building complex military and commercial equipment. During his time at Transvac, he developed some of the first machines for reading credit cards in retail stores. In 1968, in a Newsday article, noted Artie's vision that one day gas stations will go for the idea, allowing customers to pull in, pump their own gas, and register the transaction with their special credit cards. You could stay open 24 hours a day. He said in the article, Transvac and its successor, Miller Stewart, launched TV and radio stations in Haiti and worked with Fairchild Republic on various American military aircraft, including the F-105 fighter, the A-10 attack aircraft, the T-46 trainer, the SF-340, a commercial turboprop aircraft. Eventually, he went on to hold 7 patents related to the ATM machine, several types of vending machines, and of course, the gasoline pay at the pump. Transvac eventually went public, completing his meteoric rise from the bantams to the boardroom. Artie was not done there. With the private sector comfortably in his grasp, he set his sights on public life. In 1974, he ran for Congress as a third-party candidate. Under the Liberal ticket, he ran on a platform of women's rights and bringing more defense jobs to Long Island. The Dems argued he was on the ballot illegally. The Republicans claimed he was too progressive. While his intentions in running for Congress have often been the subject of much intrigue, his policies were actually quite prescient. In his platform, he stated, "We should make the development of new alternative sources of energy the national technological priority of the 70s, in the same way the program to land a man on the moon was a priority of the 60s. Funds will be well spent on this type of Manhattan project to approach energy independence." If only he had won the election. The most important accomplishment of his career, however, was his raising, along with Eleanor, of 3 strong women with great taste: Donna, Lisa, and Jill. 4 outstanding grandchildren: Brian, Katie, Olivia, and Emma. For me, what started as a student recruitment assignment for my beloved Michigan grew into a 40-year relationship. A couple of memorable moments that come to mind are when you went with me to Chase Bank to secure my first business loan. We spent many winters together in South Florida when the children were young, where I accidentally rear-ended your Rolls Royce with a rental car. Unbelievably, the time when you tried to induct me into the Masons as a grown man. I went in it with pure love for you. However, despite having never even rushed a fraternity in college. The occasional fisticuffs we encountered with strangers over good movie theater seats. But however, the general love and good feelings you provided that held our family together through thick and thin. I love you. I will surely miss you. May you rest in peace. Thank you.
Before I begin, on behalf of me and my sisters, I want to thank my dad's 3 caretakers, BJ, Mark, and Ed. Over the last 4 years, you have had a profound impact on our lives. The care you gave our dad was the most loving and outstanding care, fit for a king. My dad felt like he was in your fraternity, and you made him feel like the president. He will be grateful forever, as will we. You gave us peace of mind every day and every night, and we thank you. And thank you for all the hundreds of texts, emails, and caring and calls sharing about the kind of man my dad was, what he meant to you, and how he made you feel. That alone could be his legacy. And now I have a long speech, so I apologize. I'm never one short on words, so. How can I do justice for a man that deserves a spectacular and extraordinary eulogy? I wanted it to be eloquent, poignant, and funny, and wish it could be extraordinary. But in my sadness, all I could come up with was just a free flow of feelings and stories from the heart. I pray that this is not a disservice to my dad, who was full of life and who lived an extraordinary life. I will not even go into what kind of relationship he had with his grandchildren, more than to say that it was beyond description. Adoration and deep friendship doesn't begin to touch on it, but their words will better convey that. As for me, I spent the better part of my early life preparing myself for the day that I would lose my father. I can remember the year when I first got my license, driving alone on the LIE and forcing myself to pretend and feel what it would be like if you were gone, so I could slowly desensitize myself. Well, that didn't work. I now know that you can never be fully prepared for losing your hero. Even as the Reagans coined the term, the long goodbye, there was no stage that you were actually ready to say goodbye. And my dad was someone that no one wanted to say goodbye to. From local store owners to people in his business world, to his most beloved and cherished best buddies of almost 80 years, the Bantams, to his friends from Brooklyn, Plainview, Dix Hills, the Masons, his grandchildren's friends, the list goes on and on. He even had friends in the mob throughout his life who were always willing to have his back. And those are some crazy stories. My dad was one special human. He was surely a character, but most importantly, a compassionate, loyal, nurturing, devoted, brilliant, loving, and sentimental man. He was a legendary schemer, par none. He wasn't your typical dad if you grew up in the 70s like I did. He was an equal participant with my mom in every aspect of our lives. He worked, he cooked, he cleaned, he planted beautiful flower gardens. He helped me decide on clothes and pack for my honeymoon. He was the decorating committee for all of our school events. He helped decorate our college dorm rooms. He taught us how to tie-dye clothing, cut whales out of watermelons, make castles out of candy, how to make full working revolving solar systems, how to make air-conditioned personal spacesuits, how to make working robots for school projects. He made us a full fake store instead of a simple lemonade stand. I'm not sure if the word taught us is fully accurate. Yes, we did learn as we began the school projects and then a bit through observation. But then as we tired, he let us go to bed and awake to the most professional school projects you ever saw. Reports fully bound on a bookbinding machine, stating paper and burning the edges to make it look old. However much he did versus we did, we absorbed enough to pass it on to our own children for sure. When we had company, which is a regular event in the Hoffer house, he set up the house like a movie set. Fires blazing, lights dimmed, music on the stereo, and the player piano playing. He taught us photography and painting. We did that together as hobbies. Our childhood was a magical one that set us up in life in ways we never could have realized then. We were very loved by him and always felt safe with Artie in the world. There was no occasion that he didn't make into an event, no ask ever too great or impossible. Artie always made it happen. We wanted a treehouse. He commissioned an architect to build a beautifully architecturally designed treehouse. One story that comes to mind that my sisters and I smile at is when we were in Haiti. My dad loved Haiti. First of all, he was like a movie star in Haiti, having been the first American businessman there and having introduced and built television for a country that never had television. My sisters and I were the first entertainment singing on Haitian TV. One year when we were in Haiti for Christmas vacation, after 2 weeks at the El Rancho Hotel, our home away from home, we were boarded on a plane heading home to the United States. We were all so sad, and we said to our parents, we wish we didn't have to go home, and we wish we could stay longer. With that, my dad unbuckled his seatbelt, stood up, and went to the pilot and said, please have our bags removed. We are deplaning. He looked at us and said, okay, let's stay 2 more weeks. And so we did. That was our dad. He made our dreams come true. We always knew he could make the impossible possible. My dad was an inventor, a schemer, and a jokester par none. He loved a new toy, a gadget, or a really well-planned and executed scheme. He always had a devious plot to execute and make us laugh. My mom was forever rolling her eyes, and then came an Artie. He had schemes that the greatest criminals of all times could learn from. These are stories that his friends can still tell. One such story is when he stole his college exams by breaking into a building at night at City College and stole all the answers. He then and sold all the answers, I should say. Another is when he pretended to have a broken arm and wore a cast with a listening device while his friends sat in the bathroom and gave him the answers to the exam. He and my mom played pranks on their friends in Dix Hills, short sheeting their beds and saran wrapping their toilets. The list goes on and on. For such a brilliant mind, a defense contractor, an electrical engineer, a professor of physics as a side job, he was a relaxed and fun human being. The combination is so rare, but so was my dad. My dad loved technology before the internet made it cool. We had a car phone in the 70s when no one heard of car phones. We had televisions that came out of a carpeted floor and TV screens that came down from the ceiling. We had access to first-run movies before they came out for the neighborhood to watch. He loved a good party, a good speech, and to be surrounded by his friends and ours. Everyone loved Artie, his laughter, his smile, and his spirit. He was the original people person. Even his grandchildren's friends all knew him well and loved him. He made everyone he knew feel welcome at all times in our home and in our lives, and was always inclusive and inviting. My dad was also a very loyal man. No better story exemplifies this trait of loyalty than the story of my dad and his longtime driver, Sam. When my dad's driver, Sam, had a few heart attacks and he was told by his doctor that he should not drive anymore, my mom insisted that my dad fire him or let him go, as they say. After much discussion, my dad finally agreed. 1 year later, I was driving down Glen Cove Road, and lo and behold, I see my dad driving his car and Sam sitting in the passenger seat. He never fired Sam, but he told my mom that he did. My dad was always an elegant and well-dressed man. He had manis and pedis and massages way before it became a thing for men. He loved going to get his hot towel shaves and, of course, was friends with all the ladies that massaged his feet. My mother was a fan of the understated. My dad drove around in his Rolls Royce and Citroen Maserati, even though it embarrassed my mother. When she made him get rid of the car, he had it stored in a warehouse because he loved it so, and then he forgot where he stored it. Some lucky person is driving around in a nice car somewhere. Enjoy it on Artie. As for his work, his place, as he called it, he loved his employees and all the people he worked with. He was so kind and loyal to them and treated them as family, especially Ginny, his assistant. My dad loved bringing us to work with him often. In high school, my friends and I all had jobs in his factory until I tried to unionize the place and I was let go. My friends and I campaigned for him when he ran for Congress, walking door to door and making buttons on his, of course, professional button making machine. As he ran to break up a vote and succeeded at that, he actually lost as planned. However, that did not stop Artie Hoffer from using the title Congressman Hoffer for years to come to secure unavailable hotel, restaurant, and airline reservations, and it always worked. Despite all the aforementioned stories of my dad, the one takeaway that everyone who knew him has said over the past few days was his warmth, humor, kindness, generosity, and genuine interest in those he met during his life. And the term quite the gentleman was used so often. Just even the simple things and simple times with my dad were my favorite. Cuddling in front of the TV or long night conversations on the telephone. He was my go-to person growing up, the first person I'd call to share a disappointment or a success with. He instilled the core values in each of us of kindness and caring about others. He made us appreciate the non-material things by example, as he was a dedicated, loyal, and exemplary friend. I am told by so many people that with all my dad's success and good fortune, he always stayed grounded and humble and never took anything for granted. He shared his success with those he loved and less fortunate. He was actively involved in too many charities to mention and on the board of most. He started so many programs for people who had no one to fight for them, working mothers, nonviolent ex-cons re-entering the workforce, people with disabilities, and more. He was kind to the stranger, always. But most importantly, he was the one who loved me unconditionally and had more pride and confidence in me than I had ever had in myself. He was my problem solver and my cheerleader. He always was my hero. My accomplishments never felt full until shared with my dad. He made everything fun, but was seriously there for you and present when you needed him. My dad was so proud of his accomplishments because he achieved it all on his own. He only felt saddened that his parents never lived to see his success as a husband, father, and grandfather. His greatest joy was his family and close friends. He adored his sisters and his parents. He saved every memory of his family and told stories over and over about growing up with them. He was so focused on preserving the memories of his family tree and the stories of his ancestors. As he developed Alzheimer's, the one thing that made him so happy was looking at pictures of his parents, sisters, aunts, uncles, and cousins throughout his life. He would point to the old pictures of friends and family growing up and say, "You remember? and I would repeat the stories I had heard 100 times. He would smile, laugh, kiss me, and say, "Thank you." That and looking at books and photos of history over and over made him the most content over the past couple of years. He walked around the house hugging those albums and books of and photos of my mom. He surrounded his room with photos of my mom after she died and woke up every morning and went to bed every night cherishing and kissing each one, many times with a tear running down his face. Everyone needs to be cherished and adored and loved like Ellie Hoffer was by Artie. He adored her from afar at Brooklyn College and made it his business to meet her, marry her, and continue to love her forever. All of their friends remember their crazy relationship, crazy for so many reasons. Two of their friends aptly coined a short melody that captured a lot of their interactions, and we still use it as a family today. It went like this: "The blame's on Arthur Hoffer." Despite all that, my mom was proud of my dad and his accomplishments all throughout their lives. She always told everyone how he was too ahead of his time with all of his crazy inventions. Together, they made a life of beauty, adventure, and joy for the three of us. Together, we went to shows, galleries, museums, opera, and concerts. All the while, they try to teach us about the history and background of the event before we ever attended. We played games and sang around the player piano and played sports and danced to music. He loved music and dancing, especially even more in his later years, and we did that with him until the very end. My parents complimented each other so well. My mom was quietly the wind beneath his wings. When something wasn't done correctly, though, she was not the quiet one, for the blame was on Arthur Hoffer. But many of his executed ideas were her ideas. Yes, they fought, but together they were a team and perfect for one another. For a man who always very much cared that he be remembered, and a man who well documented his whole life of memories with scrapbooks, movies, photo albums, saved cards, letters, framed articles, typewritten news stories, newspaper articles down to my mother's contractions from start to stop with each one of us. And for such a beloved character of a man, I think the world will have a hard time not remembering you, Dad. Your stories will last 10 lifetimes. Have no worry about that. The world can never forget Artie Hoffer. Dad, I will always miss seeing you and your beautiful smile. I love you with all my heart. Rest in peace. Please.
Okay. Tough act to follow. And quite repetitive, I'll be. We will all be quite repetitive, I assume. Okay. What? My most prominent memories of my dad are the smells that transport me back to a specific and special moment in time. I'd love to share a few of them with you. Patiently waiting for him every night to arrive home from work, the signal that he walked in the house was a distinct smell was a distinct sweet and woody smell from his pipe and cigars and the aroma of cologne. I always watched him methodically put his personal items away, his business cards, cufflinks, watch, jacket, the list goes on and on. A process that took quite a long time and always done in the exact same order as I would sit on his bed and wait for my huge hug and kiss and tickle. I wonder who I inherited my OCD from. Walking into his office, whether at Transac or Miller Stewart, passing by Ginny, his dear assistant's room, where I could peek my head in and smell her delicate scent of perfume. Then down the hall, it was actually only 2 or 3 steps, but seemed like an eternity to arrive at the larger-than-life man sitting behind the huge chair and desk, and became overwhelmed by the distinct aura of tobacco, cabinets of fresh supplies, handwritten counting ledgers, newspapers, and checkbooks. I was allowed to take whatever I wanted from that supply cabinet, which at my age was my favorite thrill. Then heading on back to the factory, which had powerful traces of wires, circuit boards, soldering irons, and his extremely diverse and beloved family of workers. His cars, the Rolls Royce, the Cadillacs, and his prized Citroen Maserati. He proudly drove around in them with the masculine smell of a rustic cabin in the woods and cowhide. Until that fateful night that he rescued me down at the A&P when I dropped the only set of keys down the ignition of the Citroen, which at that point had a strong, pungent smell of beer and a huge punishment awaiting me. Us 3 girls opened our eyes on the weekend mornings to a sweet and savory smell of Dad in the kitchen cooking matzo pie, pancakes, and waffles. Rubber cement, watching him redo every one of my school projects so that it would be perfect by his standards. Port-au-Prince, Haiti, with the distinctive smell of chickens, dust, charcoal, cook fires burning, and all the children's school uniforms. Then back at the luxurious El Rancho Hotel with the authoritarian Papa Doc and government officials filled with the scent of every flower imaginable, freshly pressed linens, and the taste of sugar cane. His home office, which always had the subtle odor of a congressional campaign, bumper stickers, pins, pamphlets, and newspapers. And my favorite of all was at the local diner, just the two of us, sharing one huge dessert with 2 spoons and the sweetness of strawberry, whipped cream, and cake, just like my father. I love these memories, personal and permanent, by the sounds, smells, and visuals they evoke. But of course, as life teaches us over and over again, all things are temporary in nature, which is why these memories that live inside of me are the most precious of possessions. I'd like to end by sharing this poem written by the theologian and philosopher, Georgia Harkness, titled To My Father. A giant pine, magnificent and old, stood staunch against the sky and all around. Shed beauty, grace, and power. Within its folds, birds safely reared their young. The velvet ground beneath them was gentle, and the cooling shade gave cheer by the passers-by. Its towering arms a landmark stood, erect and unafraid, as if to say, fear not life's alarms. It fell one day, where it had dauntless stood, was loneliness and void. But men who passed paid tribute and said, to know this life was good, it left its mark on me. Its work stands fast, and so it lives. Such life no bonds can hold. This giant pine, magnificent and old. I love you, Daddy, and you will be with me forever. Everyone's fixing. What?
Coat or in your shirt? Everything.
Since last Wednesday, I've been procrastinating and have had total writer's block. And I love to write, yet I did everything except start writing about my dad and his eulogy. I suddenly realized late yesterday afternoon that I had not put one word to this page. How could I possibly summon up the strength and harness the ideal words to adequately describe and honor my daddy, your grandpa, everyone's best friend? I expected to sit down and have the words just easily flow to the page. Well, that hasn't happened. There is too much to speak of, so sometimes you just have to go with what you have. So here I go. My dad was a man who made everyone who knew him and met him feel so special. Everyone felt like they were his favorite. His friends, his daughters, his grandchildren, his sons-in-law, sisters, cousins, nieces, and nephews, his caretakers, even the shoemaker in town. All of us felt like his favorite. Donna and I ran into Tony, the shoemaker, just the other day in Manhasset to pick something up. Not only did he ask if he could come with us and visit my dad, but at that very moment, this grown man and a stranger to me started to cry when he heard my dad wasn't feeling well. The reality is that my father loved people because being with them, learning about them, and making them feel good about themselves. Because Alzheimer's strips you of the ability to hide your true emotions, his feelings were laid bare and exposed. There is no hiding. So his secret revealed itself. He loved everyone. Everyone was special. There was perhaps one exception to this observation, my mom. I actually do know for sure that my mom was his favorite and was the love of his life, and she knew it, even with the many stories and jokes about our almost Japanese mom. There was only Ellie. Daddy was such a dedicated and loving husband who stood by the woman he loved for their lifetime together. Their relationship ran so deep, and his love for my mom never wavered. All jokes aside of old girlfriends, they were the love of each other's lives to the day they each passed. While my dad taught me many things, perhaps his best lesson was to show me how to love unconditionally, as he did with my mom. My parents had the same best friends for a lifetime, many as early as from second grade from Brooklyn, and those friendships were among the most important people in my dad's life. Just last week, we showed him a photograph of the Bantams, a club, group, gang of his best friends. Not only did his face light up and he went to touch each person as we listed who was in the photograph for him, he literally took the framed photo and hugged it. He would not let it go. Harold and my Aunt Julie just both left us only a few weeks ago. Deep down, I think he knew and he decided it was his time. Deep down, I think he knew and he decided it was his time to go be with them. My mom, his parents, my cousin Mitchell, and Jim, and all his loved ones who have passed. So many of my memories are deeply embedded in me through the never-ending tales kept alive by the stories my parents would constantly share over our lifetimes. My dad shared with us his many stories, albums of photographs, and the 200-page book he wrote for all of us to cherish and pass on for generations to come. We would never forget the Hoffer legacy nor history. And he made sure, a gift to our family he wanted to make before he was unable. When I try to step back and out of my current aching for my dad, my body, heart, and soul fills with a feeling of safety and warmth. It's a feeling that I can only even attempt to describe from certain memories, a feeling that comes from just having been brought up by him and my mom, a feeling fueled by great childhood memories. These memories also serve as a compass that helps me create an environment for my family, as he did for Mommy, Donna, Lisa, and me growing up. I remember so many of his birthday parties from years ago, and his friends making amazing speeches and singing the blame songs like The Blames and Artie Hopper, and constant practical jokes they all played on each other. The pool parties and house parties, usually with music like Frank Sinatra's My Way and Volare playing throughout the house in the mornings before. Everything was always so beautifully set. Everything was always beautifully set up with so much love and creativity that he and my mom put into everything. Like whales sculpted out of watermelon filled with fruit salad, and castle cakes with details like Hershey bar kisses as pieces as windows. After all the parties, when we were all asleep, he would invariably clean, vacuuming the kitchen or hosing down the pool area, wearing nothing but his jockeys. My dad's love of exploration, adventure, and travel was rooted in his desire to not just meet people, but to get to know people, their entire story. And oh no, watch out if the person was from Haiti. We would be there for hours listening to stories about his and our years in Haiti, about Haiti, Baby Doc. Yes, I asked Baby Doc why he was so fat and carried a gun, a story he constantly told. And do you know and do you remember? He traveled the world and took his family with him. He believed that the best way to really enjoy travel was to do it with your family, otherwise what was the point? Mm-hmm. Some of our happiest memories were made exploring the world. My dad was the ultimate role model when it came to being spontaneous, showing us all how to enjoy every day and seize the moment and really live. He never shied away from the spontaneity that would make us happy. He embraced it, like being at the airport in Haiti one Christmas and realizing our speeches are the same.
That means it's true.
Like being at the airport in Haiti one Christmas and realizing, well, I go home. We were having such a good time. So he proceeded to literally contact his guys, not the pilot.
Pilot was his guide.
Right. To get our luggage off the plane to stay in Haiti for another few weeks. A spontaneous and generous gesture, one of so many that we will never forget. He knew how to seize the moment and just live. I'm sure he didn't invent the motto, you only live once, yet he perfected it. About his career, all I knew as a young child was that he was an inventor and an engineer and brought me home pretty colored electrical wires to create things. Inventing ruled every aspect of his life, not just business. He personally created a fantasy basement filled with modern furniture and pinball machines that to this day, my friends still talk about. So many friends would tell me over the years how much my dad inspired them by knowing him and growing up around him. Our basement was filled with every imaginable gadget. The first large screen TV that miraculously came down from the ceiling in the 70s, and one that popped up out of the living room platform. All my dad's inventions for his family. We were even able to watch from home the first Hollywood movies on a giant machine, pre-Beta Max, pre-VHS, like Rosemary's Baby and the Blob. We had a computer room before anyone heard of computers, and a car phone in each car for his girls to be safe. Decades before anyone had car phones. When I began to show an interest in photography, he built me a dark room. If I wanted to learn to grow plants and garden, he created a small nursery so that I could farm outside my bedroom window. The pool house was my own special house to decorate, and the basement was my place to use my imagination. I spent my childhood decorating Barbie's houses, never actually playing Barbies. Learned tennis, so built the tennis court. He built us an architectural masterpiece treehouse that was sheer magic. He helped decorate my first college dorm room, helping execute a Laurie Ashley fantasy I had imagined. And for Lisa's dorm room, he upholstered the walls. He bought a cinnamon-colored car. Mom didn't like the color, and without complaint, it came back to the house in navy the next day. Instead, he laughed about it. That is my dad, and that is the gift he taught us all. And with all he accomplished, the first ATM machine, the first electric vending machines, he was home every night at 5 p.m. for family dinners. He taught the three of us 50 years ago the answer on how to balance it all. He miraculously did that without us even realizing it was a feat. He taught us that even the simplest things in life are to be cherished. Things that might sound so minor to others, like quiet but often messy moments, like when making his famous applesauce with Emma, something they always did together which heightened so many senses, all warm feelings filled with love whenever I think about it. The stories he would share with Emma while cooking, along with the sight of my dad and Emma working hard, and the smell of it cooking. Most importantly, the sound of their chit-chat about any and all things that Emma found interesting or amusing. To this day, making applesauce is Emma's favorite thing to do with him, and she fed him some just a few days ago. They both knew on a much deeper level, it is and was always so much more important than making just applesauce together. I'm certain that Emma will most definitely do the same with her children and grandchildren someday. Priceless and special beyond words. His love for Emma was inexplicable. I could see it in the twinkle in his eye and the smile that appeared on his face the minute he would see her or hear her voice. He lit up every single time, even through this last difficult week. Making applesauce with his grandchildren was just an extension of his natural ability to create a home. He taught us the importance of a house filled with laughter, with a fire going, popcorn ready for a movie or a game on the floor, and the smell of dinner cooking, and how important all those senses are. All ready to be together as a family. My dad taught us what cozy means. One of the highest compliments I receive is when someone says, "You are your father's daughter," when looking at my business, home, or family. He taught me so much, and yet I aspired to be half the person my father was. He taught me every day of my life, up to his last breath, what it means to be a good person on every level, family, friends, business. I think of all he accomplished and created throughout his lifetime, in which in and of itself is truly astonishing. I only hope that I can be half the same role model to Emma and our family. So I now look at the length of what I've written, and I realize it's too long, and I need to edit this down. I was stuck. I couldn't start, and now I could go on forever. 2 weeks ago, as he sat at the head of the table for Rosh Hashanah dinner and surveyed the table, surrounded by family, I think he realized it was his time to leave. He saw He saw and felt his legacy that night, and he knew that we would all be okay, and we would always be together and take care of one another. A promise we also made to him that night and the following precious days and nights that followed. We all have each other, Daddy. I promise you that again today for one last time and forever. Daddy, I love you.
Am I out of the? Thank you to Salesforce for all your help today. All right, for those in Zoom land who don't know me, my name is Daniel, and I'm married to Artie's youngest and most ravishing daughter, Jill. And together we have a rock star of a daughter named Emma Kate. You can call me Dan, or more aptly, you can refer to me, as the immediate family does, as number one son-in-law. Now for all you younger folk who may someday marry into a multi-sibling family, or God forbid a family of 3 daughters, I hope this brief eulogy will be instructive. My story can be your story. The path to number one son-in-law is not an easy one. But as the old saying goes, nothing good comes easy. It was either the great Toronto poet and rapper Drake, or maybe Dr. Phil, who coined another saying that life is a marathon, not a sprint. Alas, so is the path to number one son-in-law status. Let me repeat this. The path to number one son-in-law status is a marathon, not a sprint. And let me explain how this title was conferred upon me. As previously noted, I am married to Artie and Ellie's youngest daughter. We were engaged at 23 years old, and I entered the picture behind Donna, the eldest, who is married to Dr. Lloyd Lansman, and Lisa, the middle child, who is engaged to David Matling, AKA the California Kid. The odds were long and stacked against me. A skinny kid from New Jersey with a bad attitude and an even worse center part haircut. No one back then would have placed a bet on me becoming number one. And who could blame them? Look at what I was up against. Lloyd, a former Adonis. Former Adonis. Tan skin with a flowing mane of hair, a former high school football star from Port Apache Woodmere, and soon to be a board-certified surgeon. Every second-generation Brooklyn Jew's dream for his eldest daughter. He was physical, and I think he punched me in the chest every time he saw me. Seriously. Then there was David, an Ivy League-educated, former nationally ranked tennis player, on his way to becoming the Wolf of Wall Street, or as the industry now calls him, like Coyote of Small Street. He, he had olive skin like Beyonce, and the best hair I've only seen, second only to Ellie Hoffer and Stalin. To add insult to injury, he wore only the softest of soft cotton golf shirts and never wore socks. No socks. I couldn't even comprehend this. In my neighborhood growing up, if you didn't have socks, you were poor. And this is troubling on a whole other level because as many of you know, I'd never shown my ankles since 1979 on the beach or anywhere else. On paper, it would seem that I was doomed for the number 3 spot in eternity, up against guys with prescription pads and golf clubs. I should have given up then, but already expected more. And in the spirit of the race to the number 1 son-in-law being a marathon, not a sprint, I began the long march to glory. I first met Artie in the summer of 1984 when Jill had a few college friends over to the house in Dix Hills for a party. Taking that long drive from New Jersey in my 77 Oldsmobile, I have to admit I was a little nervous. When I got to the house wearing my best new little Nautica outfit and saw the mahogany Rolls Royce at the top of the hill, I nearly wet myself. Once inside, as the guests mingled, and I was trying to find my way around, Artie called out, "Can one of you guys help bring up the food from the basement?" Being the consummate kiss ass that I was and am, I blurted out in a creaky voice, "I'll help you, Mr. Hoffer." So to the basement we went to get this 12-foot giant Italian submarine sandwich on this long wooden board. Artie, in his zeal to get back upstairs and show everybody this magnificent piece of sandwich art, took the turn a little too wide and dug a divot out of the entire plaster wall coming up the stairs. He froze. He looked at me and said, "Don't tell Ellie." I assured him the secret was good with me, even though I hadn't met Ellie yet, that we blame the housekeepers. And he looked at me and said, "You're a good man, Dan." Score number 1. I was on my way. I started to realize that my ascendancy from the 3 spot was not as hard as it might appear. By the way, as an aside, when I met Ellie a few minutes later, I realized how she could strike fear into a man as accomplished as Artie. She was drop dead gorgeous, looked like Sophia Loren, and nobody's fool. And she had hair better than Stalin's. A few months later, Jill, Artie, and I headed to dinner with a few other hanger-ons, friends of Jill's, to a restaurant nightclub. Artie and I were walking and talking and ended up a few blocks ahead of the ladies who suffered from that Hoffer inability to walk and talk at the same time. So we were a few blocks ahead. There was a long line of patrons lined up in front of this nightclub restaurant thing. And Artie and I walked past them and stood by the entrance, just flanking our arms, waiting for the girls to show up. But for some reason, the line followed us and began to move forward. One of the first patrons approached Artie and asked, "Is there a cover charge tonight?" Artie's eyes locked on me, as if to say, "What do you got, Jersey boy?" It was another test. If I was ever to rise from the son-in-law dungeon, I had to perform. So I turned to the crowd in the line and I said, $10 cover, have your IDs ready. We clipped about no joke, we clipped about $300 before the bouncers came up and made us return all the money. But I passed another Artie test. This marathon was getting easier. And again, for you youngins, I'll give you one more example of the way to number 1 son-in-law. A few years ago, when Artie was still Artie, we went out to run an errand, and we took Ellie's car for some reason. Naturally, that errand provided us with the opportunity to hit a McDonald's drive-thru and grab a few Big Macs. But Artie made a rookie error and dripped special sauce on the steering wheel. Naturally, Ellie nailed him. I had to jump in and tell her that I was driving, that he only had a 3-piece chicken McNuggets. The Big Mac was on me, and I apologized. It diffused the situation. Not sure she believed us, but Artie looked at me and said, "Wow, that was a close one. Good thinking." Score again. I kept putting wins up like this over the next decade, and with Lloyd and David's glory days well behind them, I am now firmly ensconced as the number 1 son-in-law. But whether I was number 3, number 2, or number 1, I want everyone to know what an honor it has been to serve as Artie's son-in-law. I hit the son-in-law jackpot. To spend so much time with a guy as smart, as decent, and as fun to be as with Artie, who served his country and his family faithfully, is probably more than this formerly skinny kid from New Jersey deserved. That he entrusted me with his baby, Jill, the love of my life, and was so good to my baby, Emma Kate, is just a great story. I used to say that Artie was an old 50 and a young 60, because at the age of 60, he handed his girls off to the guys. One night many years ago, Artie and I decided to have a boys' night out and end up drinking a few too many Kirin Ichibans at a local Japanese restaurant, where he recounted some of his stories and exploits in the Korean War, which candidly makes me wonder, as a student of history, why the entire Korean peninsula is not controlled by North Korea today. But as I dropped him off at his apartment, we were a little tipsy, he turned to me and he said, "Thank you." But it was a thank you that was more than just for the night. Like, I sort of think he knew sort of what was coming. And he just said, "Thank you." So now it's my turn, because I probably didn't say it enough to him when he was here. So thank you, Artie. Rest in peace. Love always, #1 son-in-law.
All right. See me? Good? All right. My grandpa had 2 sisters, 2 daughters, Ellie Hoffer, his wife, and 3 additional granddaughters to boot. To say that he lived around a lot of female energy would be the understatement of the century. When I came into his life as the first male in 3 generations, I ended up not as just his grandson, but also as his brother, his friend, and his student. My grandpa was an incredibly accomplished man. He invented revolutionary technology. He was an entrepreneur, a philanthropist, a politician, and a level 72 Illuminati black belt Freemason. But of all the accomplishments, the most important assets that needed to be passed on were a litany of tricks, schemes, useless facts, stories, and random know-hows that my grandpa had either picked up over the years or had just outright invented himself. This was where I came in. I arrived at a time in his life when he was ready to develop his protege in the art of talking your way in and around everything. By this time, he had years of wisdom in addition to all of the pure brain power, but he was looking for the right student. We began to morph into one combined personality, one genetic makeup that simply existed in 2 generations. In essence, he was Dr. Evil and I became Mini-Me. He taught by a mixture of stories and hands-on experience, focused on a few key themes, and I want to share some of these lessons today. Lesson number 1, no door is actually closed, you just have to pretend you're supposed to be there. Growing up in Brooklyn and Queens, my grandpa was part of a club called the Bantams. The Bantams were an organization of young Jewish rapscallions whose apparent purpose was to play baseball once in a while, cause a bit of chaos in the neighborhood, and chase women throughout the tri-state area. But don't be fooled. The Bantams, however, were no ragtag outfit. Their schemes were precise and expertly calculated, and my grandpa was their Danny Ocean. It was out of necessity with the Bantams that my grandpa honed his original craft, the art of sneaking into places he shouldn't be in. For example, the Dodgers would give away free tickets if you caught a ball on the street during batting practice. My grandpa would simply show up to Ebbets Field with a random baseball from the store and accept his free ticket regularly. When he couldn't afford to take a girl on a nice date, he would look up temples and Jewish catering halls and see which one had a wedding that night. He would invite the girls for cocktail hour, show up like he belonged, and simply ask the other guests whose side they were from first. Naturally, he was always from the other side. When he needed a break from the war in Korea and wanted to get to Tokyo for a couple days, he'd have his friends ask for his particular engineering expertise. He'd fly out for a few days, have a little bit of fun, plug the machine back in, and fly back. What began as a need early in life became a sport as he got older. And the addition of a grandson to use as a prop as needed was simply an unfair advantage for him. We would spend hours walking around Boca West, where he had a second home in Florida, doing nothing but going into places we weren't supposed to be, just for fun. Watching baseball at the closed sports bar, sneaking into the kitchen to get snacks, taking golf carts at will. I would ask, "What happens if we get caught?" And he would just say, I'll just say I'm on the board and I'm taking my grandson with me for the days to do my inspections. One time at a Dolphins-Jets game in Miami, he just started walking me through random doors to try to get to the locker room so I could meet the team. We'll just keep going until we can't. Either I'm an old man who's lost or I'm Jerry Reed, the head of catering operations. Nobody will know what that guy actually looks like anyway. My grandpa lived by this principle, that no isn't a black and white concept. It's more of a guideline. And that life is just one big game for you to play in. And that brings me to my second lesson. There are no real rules, just things you can't talk your way out of. There was nothing that my grandpa liked to tell me about more than his time in the military. Early on in life, he would tell me, I was a bad kid. The service set me straight. And in a sense, this is indeed true. In the Army, he scored high on a chance aptitude test and was assigned to become an engineer on high-tech medical equipment in field hospitals. He took this expertise and on the GI Bill, ended up with a bachelor's and a master's degree in electrical engineering. But make no mistake, the military really allowed him the opportunity for mischief that was never seen before. My grandpa loved mischief that was innocent. Small money-making schemes where nobody got hurt, but lots of rules were broken. In the Army, he had the usual small-time rackets like selling food from the mess hall after hours and becoming the base loan shark. But one particular story was always his favorite. One weekend before he deployed to Korea, the troops had leave, but they were bound to stay within 50 miles of the base. Using his proceeds from the smaller enterprises, he chartered 2 planes to New York and sold tickets to 200 servicemen. All was going well until on Sunday night, he got a call from the charter company saying that the flights had been grounded due to safety concerns. Here he was with 200 troops about to show up AWOL for Monday's roll call back in Nashville. So what did he do? He called his commanding officer and basically told him, they're in this together now, and talked him into canceling Monday's roll call so none of them got in trouble. He then took all the proceeds and booked the troops' commercial flights back. He lost a bit of money in the end. He lost a bit of money on the fix, but in the end, nobody in the Army was the wiser. For Grandpa, there was always clear right and wrong, but for everything in between, like a 50-mile arbitrary perimeter, was fair game. In Boca West, he would take me to play golf at dusk, starting on the 9th hole with glow-in-the-dark balls so he didn't have to pay the greens fees. When he got caught letting me drive the golf cart at age 5, he told the cop it was because he had an old war injury. When he bought me my first Playboy at age 11, he pasted a cover of Newsweek around the front so that I could look at it in front of my summer camp counselors. And of course, he taught me that if you can eat a whole box of Malamars in the grocery store, it's free. Which brings me to my lesson number 3. Always have a plan. My grandpa could talk his way into anything because he knew more than everyone else. He did the research so every story was just believable enough. My grandpa was the OG Wikipedia. In his old house in Dix Hills, he had one room and an encyclopedia from, as far as I knew, every single year from the beginning of written history. He would sit with me for hours, teaching me about every big battle in history, from Troy to Waterloo to Gettysburg to Normandy. And he didn't dumb it down to me either. Just the other night, I was watching a home video of him where he's carefully explaining to me the armament logistics of the first Iraq War and how the Saudis were able to procure F-16s from the US, but without new missile guidance systems. We debated the merits of the policy and how it impacted the Russians. I was 6 at the time. Our favorite thing to do together was to build elaborate battle scenes on his ping pong table with my mini plastic soldiers. We would walk into the woods behind his house to get real branches and plants to help set the scene well. He always did remind me, though, that technically this is historically inaccurate, as this is a desert war. Near my elementary school, there was an expensive miniature store that I was obsessed with. There was one particular set I wanted, but it cost $900. My grandpa said to me, I guess learning from having raised his children in a certain sense, I won't buy this for you, but I'll help you save the money so you can buy it yourself. He and my grandma took me to the Williamsburg Savings Bank, where we opened my first savings account. Over the next 5 years, for birthdays and Hanukkah, I would ask for money to be put in the account, and every time he and my grandma would take me to the bank to deposit it themselves. Eventually, I had saved enough money to buy it. When we finally went to the store to get it, it had gone out of business. I was sad, but my grandpa just laughed and said to me, "Now you're the richest 10-year-old I know." It was almost as if this was always the plan. I still have the same savings account today. For me, it was heartbreak, but for Grandpa, it was hilarious. And that brings me to lesson number 4. Don't take yourself too seriously. The famous Congressman Charlie Wilson once said, "I don't have to take myself seriously to take my job seriously." Sorry. Nobody embodied that spirit. Sorry. Nobody embodied that spirit quite like my grandfather. There was simply never a time you could be with him where you weren't laughing. His jokes were notoriously stupid. You want to hear a dirty joke? A boy fell in the mud. You want to hear a clean joke? He took a shower. One of the few things he did take seriously was eating. Never a big dinner ended where he didn't ask the table, "All right, who wants to go get some Chinese food?" My grandpa loved to mess with everyone he met. No matter a person's background or station in life, he always treated people he knew as if they were just another friend yet to be made. From senators to janitors, everyone was a buddy, and everyone could be the target of a little bit of ribbing. His humor and presence was infectious. He did, however, have a way of going from goofy to serious at a moment's notice, and nowhere was he more serious than he was about his family. Family and heritage mattered the most to him, above all in any possessions or successes. In his older years, he researched every detail of the family tree back countless generations, so he would never forget where we came from. On the holidays, specifically Passover, he would make sure to sit me down and speak to me about the importance of tradition. How being Jewish was part of a deep and long history, and about the importance of passing down a culture of curiosity, education, and hard work. But always he would say, "You have to have fun." And then he'd overpay me for the afikomen. My grandpa's sharp wit and mind faded in his last few years of life due to Alzheimer's disease. It was quite literally in the last couple of years, the only thing he could not talk himself out of. It's difficult for me to put into words the sadness I've felt in not having the Artie of old around the last 10 years. As I've become an adult man, sorry. "25 years of devoted lessons and experience that he never got to fully enjoy the complete result. I've never really been able to tell him that I followed him into a career in software and that my job at its core revolves around me talking people into doing things and figuring out harebrained schemes to get them done. I've thought so often over the last 10 years how much he would have loved to hear my stories now. How I could be running him through strange negotiations with Chinese businessmen, sending him pictures from strange and obscure historic sites around the world. How I would pick his brain about working on the very technology he pioneered, or about what angle I was missing in working through a plan. But mostly I just wanted to tell him how these lessons helped shape my character, and how the tips and tricks that made him a great man will live on with my kids, my friends, my coworkers, and eventually my own grandchildren. In trying to find the right words, the last thing I said to him this week before he passed away was simply, "Thank you for it all." He would know exactly what I meant. I love you, Grandpa. I'll be channeling your spirit next time I want to weasel my way into somewhere I'm not supposed to be. I love you.
Okay. Hi. Hi, people on Zoom. Sorry if there's some redundancy, but you know, is what it is. He did repeat himself a lot at the end. Sorry, not funny. Okay. Yesterday, I came to Grandma and Grandpa's house to contemplate how I wanted to honor Artie surrounded by his presence. an impeccable record keeper.
Wait, stop for a second.
Stop?
That's fine.
Good? I'm gonna start over.
You do this. Good.
Everyone good? Zoom, we good? Okay, all right. Yesterday I came to Grandma and Grandpa's house to contemplate how I wanted to honor Artie surrounded by his presence. An impeccable record keeper and highly organized borderline hoarder, Artie kept documentation of every chapter of his and Ellie's life. I found myself sifting through his documents, his photos, his memoir that we've talked about, the news clippings of his accomplishments, his patents, and the objects we had spent years over the course of my life reviewing together. Grandpa also always had a love for music, whether it was Italian opera, Bocelli specifically, Swan Lake, Frank Sinatra, musicals, he loved Phantom of the Opera, or some other croony tunes from the 50s, he was always happiest with music on. So naturally, to get myself further into the Grandpa zone, I grabbed my headphones and put on Grandpa's favorite song, My Way by Frank Sinatra. Even as Alzheimer's started to hijack his brilliant mind, the song always seemed to put him at ease. Whenever we were alone in the recent years, driving to go see Aunt Julie, walking around Gracewood, or dancing in the house, this was the first song I would put on, and it always prompted a contemplative smile on his face. In this moment of reflection, I finally realized why he loved this song so much. You see, it was not just the song that he loved to listen to, but also the song that exemplified his philosophy of life. Grandpa Artie did everything his way. He took traditional rules as suggestions, challenged convention, found loopholes where loopholes never existed, and put his touch of perfection on everything around him. So to give you guys an idea of what I mean, I'm going to walk you through some of the key lyrics of the song. Number 1, I did what I had to do. I saw it through without exemption. This is probably the most salient quote that applied to nearly every corner of his life. From outfitting the Bantams clubhouse with stolen furniture from the Flatbush Avenue luxury building lobbies, to teaching me how to set a perfectly arranged holiday table with flowers and, as we saw on video the other day, perfectly folded napkins. But truly, it instantly brought me back to the stories of young Artie's dating life. First, in his teens and 20s, he feigned proposals and plans of marriage to women to get what he wanted. Specifically Carol, who never gave back his paratrooper rings, and Beatrice from Nashville, whose heart he broke when he went off to Korea. While deployed, he met his beloved beauty in Tokyo, Kyoko Tanaka, who he told his family at home, I quote, was wearing a Jewish star when they met and told him that she had converted. But naturally, the best story of all regarding doing what he had to do and seeing it through without exemption was his pursuit of Eleanor Maydeck. Every day, while attending Brooklyn College, Artie parked his car in the same parking lot next to the tennis courts. In this lot, he spotted a gorgeous woman with impeccable style that drove to school every day with her less attractive friend in her brand new Plymouth. He tried and tried to speak to this hottie, pulling up next to her at red lights and strategically parking by her side, but only got any attention from the less attractive friend. Determined to succeed at landing a date with her, he knew he had to do it his way. In days that far predated the information accessibility we have today, he took down her license plate number and called up his friend Elliot, who lived in Albany, who he sent to the DMV and asked him to use her license plate to get her address. He then sent his younger sister, Shelley, to confirm that it was in fact her address and not her ugly friend, with a stakeout. He then managed to use her address to look up her phone number. In a stroke of luck, Ellie was seeing a man named Artie at the time. Without hesitation, he used this to his advantage to get her parents to put him on the phone and proceed, in the way that he always did, to convince her to go out with him. The rest, with a lot more playing hard to get on Ellie's side and a lot more scheming on Artie's side, is history. Which brings me to my next line of the song. Number 2. My friends, I'll say it clear, I'll state my case, of which I'm certain. From a very young age, Artie taught us all the concept of speaking with conviction. If you believe what you are saying enough, others will too. I think my friends on Zoom can attest to the fact that this trickled down from Artie to Donna, to me, and probably more so to Brian. He never let the details get in the way of a good story, and he used this skill to ascend in his interpersonal and business relationships. For example, he earned an honorable discharge from the Army because he was injured in the Korean War. He broke his nose while playing basketball. He was a paratrooper in the Army, who I'm pretty sure executed a few jumps in training and spent the rest of his time fixing machines, loan sharking, partying, and dabbling in foreign affairs. Plus, he didn't know how to swim. To complement his ability to bend the truth, he had a wealth of knowledge in geopolitical dynamics, history, politics, and more that could challenge any modern Wikipedia page, which simultaneously bored me and blew me away. For the foundation of his stories were always rooted in the key point that if you're going to exaggerate, you start with the facts. Third line, I traveled each and every highway. Artie was always a man that appreciated the art of travel and cultural exploration. He and Grandma took great lengths to provide a global perspective on photography, painting, theater, opera, a foundational education for which I'm so grateful. At a mere 7 years old, he and Grandma Ellie took me and Brian on the Concorde to Paris and London, both of our first times in Europe. We arrived in London and went straight to see the original cast of Mamma Mia. And despite my falling asleep through most of the show, I was completely in love. They not only tolerated a start-to-finish rendition of the entire show performed by me into a Pellegrino bottle in the hotel room, but they also recorded the entire 2-hour ordeal for posterity. They were complete enablers in my misguided belief that I was going to be a Broadway star. But hey, they encouraged me to do it my way. I can remember blinks of this trip like it was yesterday, marching to dinner in London, chanting Grandpa's Army chants. Left, left, I left my wife with 48 kids, right, right, right in the middle of the kitchen floor. There we go. I remember standing with Grandma and Grandpa in Monet's garden in the exact location where he painted his famous Water Lily series after seeing the paintings in person, cultivating a 7-year-old appreciation of French Impressionism. And of course, I experienced my first transatlantic panic attack when I got locked in the bathroom for 30 minutes during dinner on the second night of our trip. Speaking of restaurants, this brings me to my next lyric. When I bit off more than I could chew, but through it all, when there was doubt, I ate it up and spit it out. Okay, so maybe this isn't as direct of a correlation, but there's no way I'm making it through this eulogy without mentioning Grandpa's eating habits. The man loved to eat, and Grandma loved to police it. Whenever I think of vivacious Grandpa in my younger years, I see him eating. I picture snuggling in his cozy belly on the chaise lounge in the Boca West house. I see him sneaking Malamars in the pantry once Grandma got into bed. And of course, I think of my favorite Grandpa joke. On the way home from any big, delicious dinner, without fail, he always asks, "Who wants Chinese food?" Just so you know, Gramps, this past Friday night, the whole family got together. We ate a massive Italian meal and then had some Chinese food at the end in your honor, your favorite. And finally, the last lyric. I've loved, laughed, and cried. I've had my fill, my share of losing. And now, as tears subside, I find it all so amusing. To think that I did all that, and may I say, not in a shy way. Oh no, no, not me. I did it my way. Grandpa, thank you for showing me what a life well lived looks like. Even in this deep moment of sadness and of loss, I sit in awe and admiration of the rich life of accomplishment, humor, culture, warmth, and family that you cultivated. You did all that. You built a business from the ground up. You invented the ATM, the pay at the pump gas, the vending machine. You built planes. You ran for Congress. You sat on boards of charities. You brought television to Haiti. All the while, you blew up mattresses next to your bed for Emma and Olivia and I to sleep right next to you, even though there were empty bedrooms upstairs. And you filled my life with snuggles, hugs, and kisses. Most importantly, you taught me the importance of family, legacy, and love. We cherish what you built and promise to honor it all of our days. Thank you for always doing it your way. I love you deeply and miss you already.
Grandpa was simply the greatest. As many of us know, Grandpa loved to eat almost anything. I could still hear Grandma Ellie telling him to stop sneaking candy and desserts. Therefore, that brings me to one of my fondest memories of my grandpa, which was making his famous applesauce from scratch. Since I was a little girl, propped up on the counter, or even a few years ago standing at his side, making applesauce together was more than the delicious finished product. It was a vehicle for us to spend time together, talk about things big and small, and laugh about the mess we'd make. Grandpa's recipe for applesauce is really thus a metaphor for how he lived his life, and I like to share that secret recipe with everyone. Grandpa's recipe for life included the finest ingredients available at Mankind Supermarket. A few cups of love, 1 tablespoon of patience, 1 heaping tablespoon of generosity, 1 pint of kindness, 1 quart of laughter, and 1 pinch of genuine concern. He then mixed in willingness, happiness, and wisdom according to taste, and he stirred it up well. Then he spread it over a span of 88 years and served it to each and every person he met. Grandpa's recipe for life was informed by countless global experiences and stories that I had the privilege of hearing firsthand. I would love going downstairs with him and exploring his basement full of treasures from all around the world and his countless lifetime accomplishments. His stories are like no other, and even if I heard them before, I'd listen closely for hours, soaking it all in. He would also share many memories of his time in the Korean War as a member of the Army's airborne unit, and talked about how what he saw and experienced shaped his life. My grandpa served his country and served his family, and for that I am forever grateful and so proud to call him my grandpa. Service to family was very important to my grandpa, and I would say he was the glue that kept our family tight and close. He raised 3 amazing girls who are all so special, and I know his values and traditions were passed down to me, Brian, Katie, and Olivia, and will be carried down generation after generation. That is, if Katie and I ever get married. My grandpa loved life and touched the lives of everyone around him. He was always happy, and I'll never forget the big smile on his face when he would see his grandchildren. I'm going to miss tearing up the dance floor with you, Grandpa. Even though Alzheimer's took him from us too soon, first his mind, then his body, there was not a day that went by without him dancing and smiling and embracing life to the fullest. I have comfort in knowing he is at peace and has done his job on this earth. My grandpa Artie was one of my favorite people on this planet. He was an incredible role model who taught me the importance of discipline and hard work. He taught me I could achieve anything if I put my mind to it. He raised 3 strong and successful daughters, and his expectations for his grandchildren were just as high. My grandpa was selfless and one of the kindest men I've ever met. He would literally give you the shirt off his back. His generosity was limitless, and he had the biggest heart full of love. I'm so blessed and grateful for the strong bond that we had, and I'll treasure the memories of him forever. He was my role model and friend, my biggest cheerleader, confidant, and co-chef, and I know his guidance and love will carry me through to the end of my days. He was indeed the greatest. I can't express how much love I have for you, Grandpa, a love that will stay with me forever, and you will always live in my heart. I promise to follow your recipe for life and put your guidance and wisdom to work in my lifetime. Rest in peace. I love you so much.
Author. As an inventor, how could you know that in these days of Zooming and in the pandemic, there are no rules, or there are new rules for mourners that have been created? I ask you, mourners, whether filling the grave with a shovel or a handful of soil. I brought gloves if you want, and there are wipes here, or using a cup of dirt to fill to cover the coffin. To all of you to perform this last mitzvah. As you use the shovel, okay, as you use the shovel, please know that the first dig is in using it backwards to remind us what a difficult task we have in front of us. And this is the last mitzvah. Okay. Please stay on that. Please stay on the cement. Please, please stay.
No, the sound's coming from here. I'm sorry, I didn't realize.
Everyone together. Yitzgadal v'yikadash shemei rabah. Divra hurute. V'yamlech malhute. V'kol beit Yisrael ba'agala v'zman kari v'imru amen. Yehei shmei rabah barach le'olam alamei alamaya. Yitbarach v'yishtabach v'yitahar v'yisraman v'yisnaseh. Yishadar v'yishaleh v'yishalal shemei kudusha b'richu. Le'ela min kol berachata v'shirata tushbahata v'ne'emata Tamiram v'yalma v'yimru amen. Yehei shlama rabba min shemaya v'chaim aleinu v'yakol Yisrael v'yimru amen. Osei shalom b'mromav u'ya'aseh shalom aleinu v'yakol Yisrael v'yimru amen. I ask those who are here, kindly form two lines on either side of the sidewalk, please. The mourners shortly, the family and children, grandkids will walk through, which means that to you, Artie's family, please note that these are your loved ones, your friends, your family. You'll never walk alone. Please.
Thank you.
Thanks.